Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we're joined by the wonderful David Moscow, who is the host and executive producer of the wonderful series From Scratch. And I wanted to start by asking a little bit more about the genesis of this show, because the original idea actually stemmed from a documentary that you wanted to make, and then you were encouraged to turn it into a series. And so when you had that initial flicker of the idea in terms of what you wanted to make, and then when you were developing the series, how did you take that original idea as like a real foundation and then figure out the spaces where you could really expand and grow the idea into what it ended up becoming for the series, which is not just across the US, but is a real international exploration of food and our relationship to it?
Yeah. The documentary came out of a particular time. It was 2015, 16, and the election was happening, and there was this real vilification of Mexicans at the time. And I live in California, which was Mexico longer than it was California, and also I love tacos and margaritas. I think margarita is the top cocktail for all Americans, the number one cocktail in the US. So it just seemed like really, I mean, aside from just that it was ridiculous to villainize our family, our friends, our neighbors, I thought that like tacos and margaritas are American, and let's explore sort of those food dishes. Let's go make a documentary about how a taco is made. And I'd go down to Oaxaca and harvest corn with subsistence farmers and make masa and harvest agave and make mezcal or tequila. And so we went and shot a teaser, and I showed it to my agents, and one of my producing partners is the main director of Chef's Table. And so he showed it to his agents, I showed it to my agents, and then suddenly they were like, no, you shouldn't do this as a documentary. You should do this as a TV series, and each week should be an exploration of food cultures. You could go wherever, and that was I hadn't thought of it. So it was one of those moments where, oh, agents doing their jobs, this is incredible. And they really transformed sort of what we wanted to do. And so we used that initial sizzle piece that we shot as a kind of a pilot type of thing. And along the way, you know, my agency brought it to Bourdain's company, or the production company, 0.0, and Clay's agent brought it to Andrew Zimmern, who they represented. And so we started getting into the food world. And one of the interesting things that goes along with when you're developing a show is, why are you telling this story, right? Because you got to keep people coming back to you as this narrator in a way, or the host. And it's, I mean, Gordon Ramsay, it's easy, right? He's a chef, and he's going to go out and learn how to make different meals with different people. Or Bourdain is going to go and talk, about food and politics and that just makes sense. So I had to really kind of like look inside and see, well, why am I telling this story? What's important to me? Why am I gravitating to this journey, this adventure? And that was, I mean, there were a lot of different streams that were coming in. I was about to have a child, and I was thinking, what do I want to do with a kid? What do you do with a kid? What do you do with a 3-year-old, right? So I started remembering what my parents did, and we really spent a lot of time outdoors. My mom came from Utah and Montana, and I had a ton of cousins and family there. And I spent my summers, splashing through streams and fishing with my grandpa and apple picking and pumpkin picking. And considering that I grew up in New York, we actually spent a lot of time outside. And so that was something I wanted to do with my son, for my son. And that really was putting him in touch with the natural world, and with the food. Going and picking a berry and eating it, is such an incredible human thing. So that was one side of it. The other was I did want to talk about different food cultures, you know, in a world that is splintering. It feels like sometimes that's sometimes scary, and we all think that we're often, you know, heading in different directions. There's something incredibly community building and connective about food. You know, we sometimes like to think that we're on our own and we're an island, and, you know, especially Americans, I pull up my bootstraps, and I did it myself. And, you know, when you explore food, when you explore a slice of pizza and you walk it back, there are 80 people that it took to make that piece of pizza. And so suddenly, you know, no matter how much money you made, you know, the basic act of eating connects you to this world of people. And then also, I think that there's this constant fight for social, racial, and economic justice. And the food producers are really at the forefront of that. They're at the front line of that, and climate change and a lot of stuff that's going on. And so I sort of felt like it would be great to tell their stories. You see a lot of stories of chefs. I mean, chefs really have a voice right now, which they didn't before, but I wanted to kind of like walk it back. Clay and I discussed like this is the 6 months or the year before Chef's Table starts, right? Chef's Table, you arrive at the chef's table, and we would go backwards to the people who were getting it there, and really show the pride and the hard work and the tough times that people who bring our food, the most important of, you know, necessities to our table. So that was it. All those things were kind of going in, and then we really worked hard to try and find a structure to the show that would kind of be able to embrace that and also allow me to be the host. So we figured it out.
Well, speaking of you hosting the show, one of the things that I really appreciate in terms of the way that you talk about the making of it is that you admit yourself that you had to find your comfort zone and who you were as a host on camera, coming from an acting background, because there is a very different stylistic approach. And it is a lot about how do you want to bring the audience into the story? You know, you're the person introducing us to the chefs and to the people who are helping to procure the food in all these different ways. And that in the first season, that actually the order of episodes even changed a little bit based on wanting to start with some of the stronger episodes that maybe weren't even the first ones that you filmed. And so coming into the second season, how was that a completely different journey and experience with just having really figured out what you wanted your voice as a host on this show in particular to be at that point, and having a different comfort level of how you're introducing us and bringing us into this world?
Yeah, the evolution was substantial, I hope. The first episodes were like bananas. It was like, you know, we landed in the Philippines for episode 1, and it was a shit show. And I was at the heart of it, like me trying to find my sea legs underneath me, figuratively and literally. We were fishing there, and what was I trying to say, and how did I knew that I always knew that I wasn't the expert, and that it shouldn't be me telling people my thoughts on this. But really, I was there to be like you, I was there to talk with somebody about what they did, what they knew, and allow them to have a voice. And if I could make it funny or contrast my naivete or my inability to their expertise, right? That I always knew that was a part of it. That I wanted to be this layman, slacker, grumpy, like however it was, you got to get up at 4 a.m. to do harvest stuff. I mean, that's a nightmare, right? And these people do that every day. So I always felt that that's kind of like a, in a world, or at least sort of on the web, everyone's an expert, right? And I kind of wanted to highlight, well, no, this is what experts really look like. And I'm not that person. And so this guy can shoot a bow and arrow. You know, I don't know how to do it. I can barely pull it back, right? So, and then along the way, you sort of okay, well, this works and this doesn't work. This is what people are responding to, and this doesn't. So you kind of call. And season one, I really, we landed in this angle of repose that felt like, you know, a good conversation with the chef to open it, and then really just put me through the ringer and have me respond to things that are going on. And the highlight, low light was me almost drowning in Sardinia, right? Like I was like, I'm a good swimmer. Like go off to go harvest what started off as an octopus, and then that didn't work out well, so it pivoted to sea anemones. And I'm with this free diver he knows what he's doing, and he was a champion free diver in Sardinia. And thank goodness, because when wave sets came in and I almost drowned, he basically took a breath, grabbed me, and dragged me out. He can hold his breath, I think, for like 7 minutes or something like that. And it almost took that much to get me out of this kind of whirlpool that was smashing me up against the rocks. And so second season, we've fine-tuned it a bit. And I now know kind of what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is the moments where I'll turn the camera and start sort of pontificating. And instead, I lean in and ask more questions, and so I feel like what's really cool is that people who have knowledge, who aren't usually asked, how do you do this? Why did you do this? They get very excited and have a lot to say and incredibly informative. So yeah, that we've started to really hone in on the we call it like the medicine in the ice cream, right? There's this adventurous ice cream, and then there's the learnings that go along, and we have a nice mix where you don't really taste the medicine, but it goes down easy, kind of thing.
I love it. And within the structure of the show, you essentially have a chef creating a recipe, and you're then going out and foraging for and sourcing all of the ingredients for it in a natural form. And it sounds like what the chefs do is that they actually put together 3 possible recipes. And are you coming in with certain parameters, kind of having already looked at what grows locally, seasonally, what's around, what are some potential ingredients that we think we might be able to source, and they're making recipes off of that? Or are they the ones kind of dictating like, oh, these are recipes based on things that we know are sourceable within the area at this time of year?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of chefs don't think that way. Some chefs do, but a lot of chefs don't think that way because they are able to get ingredients any time of year. So that isn't necessarily, and that becomes a problem for us to deal with in the episode. So a chef will put duck on a menu, and it's not duck hunting season. So we either have to go to a farm and get farm duck, or we have to pivot and do something else. Or, and that's another thing, we can fail. And I do fail often because it's hard. So if I don't get a sea anemone or an octopus, we've got to do something different with it. But the chefs, we'll go through this sort of pre-production process with them where they'll send a few, 3 to 5, and we'll go through and we say, oh, well, we haven't done eels. That'd be an interesting story to tell. And eels in, England or Scotland or Ireland are an interesting story. So eels is something we want to do there. And we try to not hit ingredients that we've done recently, though. I mean, what you find is that humans eat about, 16 plants, really, and they go back to about 7 protein sources. And so that's something that we have to sort of really focus on is telling interesting new versions of something that we may have seen before. So we did pork in Mexico episode with Broken Spanish, Ray Garcia's Broken Spanish in LA, and then we did pork in Zagreb for Nov, which is the best restaurant in Croatia, in Zagreb, and those were 2 different stories of how the animal was sourced. And sort of like one, we did a deep dive on the history of pigs, and the other one we did sort of like an investigation of like, okay, well, this is hunting. So yeah, it's a few different things going into it. You're always just trying to look at the most interesting story that's going to keep people, excited.
And with looking for the most interesting story that's going to keep people the most excited, and the fact that you're bringing up some of the meat procurement within the show, going into season 2, you said that you wanted the second season to be a little bit less meat centric, but not to fully pull it away from the show. But also, there's that recognition that that's one of the aspects that people enjoy watching, and there's a little bit more dramatic tension on screen naturally from watching what the spiritual process is with a goat than necessarily going into a field and picking some vegetables. And so how did you think about, for the second season, the way in which you still wanted to ensure that there were kind of like those dramatic highs and lows and a real variation in what you were approaching, and finding different ways where foraging for food could bring that same attachment that people had to watching some of the episodes where you had that relationship and evolution with your relationship with meat?
Well, meat is an emotional relationship for people because it's a living animal and we are more connected to them than plants. And so you're never really there's no heartbreak when you pick a berry off of a bush necessarily, where sort of pigs have lots of, we've named them. There's Porky and there's Piglet and there's Wilbur. And so there's that. But editing is amazing, we were talking about earlier. And if you put a ticking clock on something, so, hunting for mushrooms when you can't find any meat and it's getting dark and this is the main piece of the meal, right? That's just as, oh my goodness, is he going to find this for the chef? And if I don't find it, what am I going to use instead? So you can lean into cinema, right? And then it becomes about storytelling as opposed to just like, all right, it's easy to pull the trigger or create feelings if you're about to slaughter something, where it puts a little bit more of the onus on us to make it interesting. And then at the same time, there are some amazing stories to tell about plants. Our premiere was in Utah, and we dove into this four-corner potato, which I had no idea what it was. And it's possibly the oldest domesticatable plant in America, possibly the oldest domesticated potato out. And normally everyone says the birthplace of potatoes is Peru, but it might be the Southwest United States. And it has this incredible historical significance because it's a Native American food that the US government in essence took away when we were committing genocide. And the Native Americans are now finding it or regrowing it again and harvesting it and selling it to high-end restaurants. So I got to meet with the head nutritionist of Dene Bakea, which is the Spanish called them Navajo, but they call themselves the Dene. And Cynthia was amazing. And then we got handed from her to these botanists at the University of Utah who talked about sort of like they found a wild pocket of this potato in the middle of Utah that they were like, it didn't belong here. What's the story behind this? And that was that was where we figured out that's probably 11,000 years of domestication, because it meant that somebody was moving it from the Southwest up into Utah, which meant that they were planting it, which meant domestication. So like, wow. So there's those stories, which, it takes a little bit more preparation. And we brought in an incredible showrunner on this year, Shannon Hunt. We took her from the doctors and convinced her to come on board our join our merry little band, and she did a really great job with sort of highlighting these special stories that we might have overlooked last year because we were running and gunning so much.
And you were bringing up editing there, and obviously that's a really important component to putting these episodes together, because it might take 7 hours to catch a fish in a river, but we're not going to watch that for 7 hours. But also it's about, which parts of the journey are you actually showing us from the entire process? How long are we spending on each of these segments? And I know you've also said that your wife, who's a co-creator on the show, is a really key audience member for you in terms of if she's finding something engaging, and really always thinking about the audience and what's going to be the most interesting aspect to them. And so what does that look like in terms of post-production on each of these episodes, and really making sure that you're finessing the way that you're telling us the story so that we have that utmost engagement at each step of the way?
I try to find, the most important thing is to bring in people who you trust, who know what they're doing, and who can tell great stories. So I leaned on friends who I know are incredible filmmakers, and I lured them in with no money, just this like adventure. What's nice is because we are telling, it's like bucket list stories, right? So like people can get galvanized about it, thank goodness. And also in the second season, COVID was sort of helpful in a way, because things kind of slowed down, but we went out. And so a couple of my editor friends who were very big, successful editors, award winner people who, get lots of money, I say, hey man, are you busy? Would you want to take a peek? And so we got some incredible people to work on telling sort of, I don't know, we got out of this structure that sometimes we leaned into last season, which was like very cable TV structure. And we moved more into like a streaming kind of, that was what I was hoping we were doing. And so we got my friend Joel Plotch, who I am a producer on a film that he would like to make. And so I reached out, and he does all Neil LaBute stuff. He's an editor on Narcos and Billions. This guy's been doing it for a long time and is super skilled and makes beautiful art. And he came in and did an episode for me. And it's a wonderful episode. It's the Zagreb episode, and it's like incredible. And telling a story that I don't know if it would have worked in your basic, bumper teaser commercial. Like we have that, but the story exists beyond just sort of like manipulating people. And the same with all my editors. John Greenhall, who he won an Emmy last year for a wrestling doc on HBO, and he came in and did the Utah episode. I had these two young artists, Marty and Jared. Marty's my director and B-Cam, and Jared's my DP. And I came across them on season 1, and I asked them to come back for season 2. And I put them, I said to Marty, would you want to direct episodes? Because he was kind of doing that last year. He was, he would hang with the crew. He was B-Cam, and he would be hanging with the crew and helping build the setups and build the shots, and really involved in sort of managing stuff. And I thought that he would be, that was just the path. That's what he was doing last year. And then he said, could I take a shot at editing? And Jared also, the DP was like, you mind if I mess around with an episode? And I was like, no, go for it. And both their episodes are amazing, and we didn't have to change a thing, and are two of my favorites. So was I answering any question there? It was something about telling the stories. Yeah, you find great people. It's like the show. I find experts and I lean on them, and I found experts on the team, and I lean on them, and I let them do, what makes them happy. And I'm a facilitator in a way.
I love hearing about that that collaboration that goes on behind the scenes to tell these stories, and really enjoy the way that you've brought us into these stories, and this real dialogue that you've created about relationships with food and culture. It's really fantastic. And thank you so much, David.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. This was cool.